Good evening, and thank you for keeping a date with us on the program Transforming Agriculture in Nigeria. I'm your host, Gabriel Ujile. Tonight, our searchlight beams on the effects of climate change on agriculture and the efforts of the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and its partners to mitigate the negative effects on Nigeria's agricultural sector. We also have news from the diary of the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security in our package this evening. Join me after the break for the details. I'll be back shortly.
Every part of Nigeria has something to offer.
In our diary tonight, onion farmers seek government intervention to enhance production and storage. Also, ICEHD calls for women inclusivity to mitigate effects of climate change. The National Onion Producers, Processors and Marketers Association of Nigeria, NOPMAN, has appealed to the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security to support the association with improved seeds and storage facilities to reduce post-harvest losses. National President of the association, Aliume Tasamu Isa, made this appeal on behalf of the association during a courtesy visit of the association to the ministry recently in Abuja. Aliu stated that Nigeria is the highest producer of onions in sub-Saharan Africa, second producer in Africa, and the seventh in the world. But unfortunately, 60% of the onions farmers recently planted was from an adulterated seed stock that was imported into the country by their members during a scarcity of the seeds in the last planting season, stating that the adulterated seeds will not bring any harvest. He said that there is a projection of a shortfall in production, and that will lead to scarcity of onions if nothing is done urgently to avert the situation.
Our prayer is we are appealing to the Honourable Minister for the immediate to support us with improved onion seed and fertilizer and other input so that we can go back to land. The Honourable Minister of State has intervened that we cannot continue to import foreign seed. What if Corona break out? How do we this thing? So we can produce our seed ordinarily by ourselves. So we are also appealing that more efforts should be geared towards we getting seed multiplication centers, maybe in the northwest and the northeast, so that we can produce our own seed, process it, package it, and even start doing export.
Reacting to the plea of the association and the imminent implication in the onion value chain, the Honorable Minister of Agriculture and Food Security, Senator Abubakar Kyari, stated that the ministry will work with the association and the National Institute for Horticultural Research to prevent the imminent danger and avert future occurrence. The minister further stated that while the federal government creates an enabling environment and support for agriculture to thrive, the private sector should take the lead role in ensuring production of seeds and other investments in the sector.
We should step up the game. Shouldn't be only producing. Somebody is taking 1 billion naira at one go. He should be thinking about his future. Don't rely on imported seed. You develop the seed yourself to protect your own future. But now dependency on government is what is now bringing everybody back to the table. Government is trying to say, private sector, do it and do it well. We will support you.
The International Center for Environmental Health and Development, ICEHD, has called on stakeholders at all levels of government and non-governmental organizations to ensure women inclusivity in decision-making in addressing the issue of climate change and other societal issues. This call was made by the representative of the International Center for Environmental Health and Development in Dubois in an interview with our correspondent during a stakeholders consultative advocacy forum recently organized by the organization in partnership with the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security in Abuja. It stated that women in agriculture are adversely affected by the effects of climate change. Hence, political and traditional leaders should always include women anytime decisions are to be made in addressing issues that affect them.
Our leaders need to integrate the concerns of women, include women. We need women inclusion, we need diversity in all that we are doing, no matter the level of decision making. Is it at the local government level, states? Is it even at the community level or national? That's what our policy makers, our decision makers, our leaders need to be incorporating now. Include women. Are you sitting down in your community to have a decision? Put women. Women leaders. Women are the ones who can sit at the front table and tell you what their real concerns are.
Research has shown that 21.5 million people globally are displaced annually by climate-related disaster. In Nigeria, 2.5 million people were displaced by floods in 2022 alone, attributed to climate change, the effect of which is felt globally. The agricultural sector is one of the sectors that is mostly affected negatively by this phenomenon. To mitigate the effect of climate change on the environment and agriculture in particular, there have been policies and programs of government, and in our next segment, Record of the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, we are focusing on the effect of climate change on agriculture and efforts of the federal government in collaboration with the International Center for Environmental Health and Development in mitigating it. Keep watching.
Flooding is one of the results of changes in temperatures and weather patterns, popularly known as climate change. The floods of 2022 in Nigeria were reported to have caused agriculture-related losses to the tune of about 700 billion naira. Aside flooding, climate change affects agriculture and the environment in many ways, which include reduction of crop yields, rising temperatures, droughts, increased pests and diseases, excessive rainfall that washes away soil nutrients, low rainfall, desertification, as well as soil erosion. Whereas climate change affects both men and women, the impact is more obvious in the disruption it causes in the lives of vulnerable groups comprising women, children, and people with special needs. These effects include loss of income and livelihoods, as well as displacements from their home, which increases their vulnerability. To mitigate the negative effects of climate change on women in the agricultural sector, the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security in October 2019 launched the National Gender Policy in Agriculture. The policy was designed to drastically reduce the vulnerability of women, girls, and people with special needs in the agricultural sector by ensuring equal access to agricultural facilities among men, women, people with special needs, among others. But what has been the journey so far on the implementation of the National Gender Policy in Agriculture?
They've had the opportunity to undertake policy advocacy around the policy using the simplified version. And as a committee, we've also participated in workshops by another member organization, this time around the Federal Ministry of Women Affairs. And then through the Ministry of Finance, we were able to participate in a workshop that the UN Women did around gender mainstreaming, gender responsive budgeting. And then we've had others, so many, including presenting memo at the National Council on Women Affairs, National Council on Food Security. And one interesting thing happened last year. Madam Director, with your permission. Last year, the memo was presented at the National Council on Agriculture asking for the domestication of this policy at state levels. And guess what? It was approved.
Following the need to incorporate emerging challenges and strategies to mitigate the effects of climate in agriculture, the International Center for Environmental Health and Development, in partnership with the Rose of Sharon Foundation and the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, recently organized Stakeholders Policy Engagement Forum on the review of the National Gender Policy in Agriculture.
In brotherhood we stand.
Others in this forum include the Federal Ministry of Women Affairs, members of the National Gender Steering Committee for the implementation of the National Gender Policy in Agriculture, Action Aid Nigeria, GIZ, AGRA, the media, among others.
As we gather today,
the Permanent Secretary, Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, who was represented at the occasion by the Director Special Duties, spoke on the state of the National Gender Policy in Agriculture.
the National Gender Policy has been in operation since it was launched on 31st October 2019, with a lifespan of 5 years, after which the policy document is due for review. Hence the need for this meeting. The policy was pivotal in addressing the unique challenges faced by rural women, farmers who are backbone of our agricultural sector. The Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security is committed to promoting sustainable agricultural practices, enhancing food security, and empowering farmers.
The Permanent Secretary further stated the focus of the National Gender Policy in Agriculture Review meeting and the impact on women, people with special needs, and the agricultural productivity in Nigeria.
We aim to strengthen policy framework, review and refine the national gender policy to ensure it addresses the evolving needs of our rural women farmers.
Also speaking during the forum, the representative of the International Center for Environmental Health and Development stated that the organization is supporting the review of the National Gender Policy in Agriculture because it aligns with its drive to address gender inequality in agriculture, among other things. She further spoke on the focus of the review meeting.
What do we intend to do here today is to create jointly and collectively, bring our ideas together to look at the contextual issues with the policy. What are the gaps? What are the areas where the policy is lacking in terms of meeting international best practices and standards? And then we can come up with a roadmap here today on what we need to do after now. What are the steps we need to take?
Other stakeholders that pledged their support for the review of the policy to mitigate the effect of climate change on agriculture include the Federal Ministry of Women Affairs, National Gender Steering Committee for the Implementation of the National Gender Policy in Agriculture, Rose of Sharon Foundation, German Agency for International Cooperation, Action Aid, Alliance for Green Revelation in Africa, Policy Support for Economic Growth, Plan International Nigeria, or Synagogues Nigeria, Women in Trade and Agriculture, among others.
We believe in the power of collaboration and working together to address critical issues in agriculture and climate resilience. And this forum reflects our commitment, our joint commitment to advancing gender equality and empowering women who are at the forefront of agriculture and grassroots-driven climate action. Our work at Axis aligns closely with the objectives of this forum, focusing on gender integration, sustainable agricultural practices, and advocacy for transformative policies. Together, we can create policies that not only address gaps, but also pave way for equitable access to resources, climate finance, and inclusive agricultural development.
The chairman of the Committee for the Implementation of the National Gender Policy in Agriculture and representative of Action Aid Nigeria applauded the effort of the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security and pledged the support of Action Aid Nigeria in the review and implementation of the policy.
Action Aid will also put in more human and financial resources towards the review as Action Aid Nigeria. We also have Policy Innovation Center here who are also doing some work on the policy, and we decided to make sure we invite them.
The stakeholders were grouped into two. Group 1 was to identify contextual issues, key areas of concern, and highlighting the gaps in the implementation, inefficiencies, areas that require update in the existing policy, best practices, and lessons learned. While Group 2 was to gather feedback from the stakeholders on their experience with the policy, the Ministry's goal and challenges faced during the implementation of the National Gender Policy in Agriculture and recommendations of the group. The stakeholders in the various groups brainstormed on the subject matter and came up with their findings and recommendations.
The problem with women farming methodology in Nigeria, women focus mainly on food crops. Men focus on cash crops, and like the World Bank said, cash crops are more lucrative, but they're not allowing women to play in the cash crop sector a lot because most of the cooperatives and the management or governance systems of cash crops is dominated by men, and that is where the money is, cocoa farming and the rest of them, rubber farming, the rest of them. Then best practices going forward, multi-stakeholder engagement like what we are doing now, simplification, we've mentioned that, capacity building.
We now found out that we have low level of awareness among stakeholders, both the farmers. Because amongst our groups, we started asking individually, were you aware? Are you aware of this document? Many said no. You can imagine at the national level, we are not aware of this document, not to talk about the farmers at the rural areas at the state level. So we now found out that there is low awareness creation. So on this, it will now help us to recommend that the next one
that there will be a lot of awareness creation.
In case you just tuned in, the program is Transforming Agriculture in Nigeria, and we are discussing the impact of climate change on agriculture and the effort of stakeholders to mitigate the effects of climate change and ensure food security. Every individual and organization have roles to play in mitigating the effects of climate change on agriculture and the environment. Aside the review of national gender policy in agriculture, the International Center for Environmental Health and Development, in partnership with the Rose of Sharon Foundation and the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, also organized a stakeholder consultative advocacy forum to promote climate justice, agricultural budgeting, and sustainable climate adaptation approaches in agriculture. In our next segment, we are focusing on these subject matters. Keep watching.
On the 21st of January 2025, the International Center for Environmental Health and Development, in partnership with Rose of Sharon Foundation and the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, organized a stakeholder consultative advocacy forum with a focus on gender and climate justice promotion strategies, sustainable climate adaptation approaches in agriculture, agricultural budgeting and sustainable funding for women farmers, accelerating action in gender equity advocacy, monitoring and evaluation impacts, among others.
If you can prioritize people, also prioritize what? The environment. Because the people live in the environment. If the environment is distorted, then where will the people live? Just imagine that one day you just wake up, there is no water, there is no land.
Research has shown that the negative effects of climate change on agriculture affects women and people with special needs more than others in the agricultural sector. Hence, there is need to ensure equitable support for women and people with special needs to succeed in the agricultural sector amidst of the climate change. But what is gender equality and equity all about in addressing the issue of climate change?
Now, gender equality also encompasses gender equity. Not just equality. For instance, you have to incorporate the concerns of every gender in whatever you are doing. Women have their specifics and men too. So those specifics must be considered in every programming and project that you are doing. That's gender equality. But when you extend it to equity, for instance, you have two people. One is taller than one. The taller one needs just one stool to stand, to see clearly, while the shorter one requires two stools. So that's the simplest version of gender equity in correlation with gender equality.
There are so many factors that mitigate against women in the agricultural sector as a result of climate change. These include low access to agricultural land, maternity health risk, low access to credit, social exclusion, drought, flooding, among others. The culture in some areas in Nigeria does not give opportunity to women to inherit agricultural land, and this affects food security negatively because women contribute up to 70% in the agricultural value chain.
Women play significant role in in the agricultural sector. Women are the gatekeepers of agricultural sector. They are the pillars. Let me give you these statistics. Women are responsible for carrying out 60% of agricultural labor. They carry out 60% of agricultural processing activities and 50% of animal husbandry related activities. Yet, this segment of the society have access to less than 20% of agricultural input. Is it right? No. That is the huge gender inequality.
There is need for traditional rulers, religious leaders, government at all level, and non-governmental organizations to advocate for women's right to land and other agricultural facilities to be able to function amidst of climate change. Responsive budget allocation with special consideration for women in agriculture is key in addressing the issues that women face due to climate change.
Sustainable funding is essential for their growth and empowerment. Collaboration among stakeholders is key to overcoming financial challenges. Policy should be inclusive and gender responsive to support women farmers effectively. Continuous capital building and access to financial resources will empower their productivity. CSO should use gender tools. I've mentioned the advocacy, lobbying, and formation of strong groups to enhance gender responsive budgeting.
During the forum, government officer from the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, Federal Ministry of Women Affairs, the civil society organizations, other non-governmental organizations, and farmers were grouped into two to brainstorm and identify sustainable climate adaptation approaches in agriculture. The group's presentations suggested possible solutions to climate change, which include sustainable farming systems, traditional methods of controlling pests and diseases, local ways of preventing goats and other animals from destroying our farms, among others.
We also have organic pesticide. This can be made with the composition from neem tree, ginger, garlic, and chili pepper. We mix it with water, then spread it on your farm to help chase away pests.
We use household wastes to make compost as organic manure. Use of resistant crop varieties. We have our local varieties that are resistant to diseases or whatever pest, so you encourage their use.
Is it against the use of GMOs?
Yes.
Okay.
Planting of windbreaks to serve as windbreaks to save your farm from wind erosion. Rotational cropping, he mentioned it. Mixed farming of livestock and crops, where you use a livestock dung or waste to feed your farm to give manure to your crops, is mixed farming. And then you use the waste of the crops to feed your animals. Use of drought-resistant crop varieties, I've said something similar to that. There are many crops that are drought-resistant.
Using goat waste. If you grind goat waste, you know goat is a very, very stubborn animal, and they can chop anything in your farm. But if you grind their waste, their own waste, and then you mix it together, with water and all of that, one, it will help to grow your own plant, and it will chase away the goat from eating your plants.
Crop rotation will solve the problem of pest infestation, because once you move to the next plot of land, maybe you cultivate groundnut, and next year you move to the next plot of land, you cultivate beans, it will be able to solve the problem of pesticide on your farm. We also talk about intercropping. Intercropping also plays a role because there are some certain crops that can be able to fix nitrogen, while others can be able to tap nitrogen, others will fix phosphorus, and like that. We also talk about planting of economic trees such as mango, citrus, cashew. This will also help in conserving the environment in terms of oxygen in the atmosphere. Then we also talk about water harvesting. We can harvest water through the rainfall and store in our jars to use it for farming. We also talk about zero tillage. This is a practice where the soil is not tilled at all. So it also improves the soil texture. It also conserves microorganisms in the soil that add or fix nitrogen and other nutrients.
Climate change has come to stay, and individuals, government, and non-governmental organizations must set up action to mitigate the effect on our environment and agriculture in particular. Until I come your way again next week with another interesting episode, I am Gabriel Ujide. Good night.